Dr. Paul Duignan, 3-Minute Outcomes, talking today about the distinction between an outcome and an output. Crucial distinction in outcomes theory, which is a theory of how we intervene in the world to change outcomes. So, as I said in an earlier 3-Minute Outcomes, a really useful way of thinking about outcomes work for any organisation or project or any kind of intervention is to think about an outcomes model. And on the right hand side we have the high level outcomes we're trying to achieve, and then we move back to the left with the boxes which describe those things that we need to do to achieve those high level outcomes. Now an output is one of those, simply one of those, you can conceive of it as one of those boxes within an outcomes model. Now how do we distinguish between an outcome and an output? Sometimes people say, well, you know, they kind of draw a line. They try and draw a line down the kind of middle of that, of the outcomes model, and say, well, outcomes are on the right hand side and outputs are on the left hand side. Now there's a technical problem with that, because in different areas an output may reach higher or lower within the particular outcomes model. Some things, and we'll describe why that is in a moment. When you think from an outcomes theory point of view, the boxes that go into an outcomes model have some characteristics. Which boxes do we allow in such a model? And those characteristics are things like, are they measurable? Are they attributable to a certain party? And the most important one for thinking about an output-outcomes distinction is, are they controllable by a particular party that's attempting to intervene? The thing about an output is it is always controllable by a particular party, and that's why it's often called the goods and services produced by an organisation or a project within some intervention. So it's a concrete thing that's produced. For instance, a pamphlet is produced, or a book is produced, or a report, or a meeting, etc. Now, the wonderful thing about an output, and why some people try to actually structure entire outcome systems on the notion of an output, is because it's controllable. It's also attributable, which means we can say who made it happen. We can say who made it happen. If we know that a pamphlet was produced and it's got an organisation's name on the bottom of that, apart from cases of fraud, we can be certain that that organisation made that happen, made that pamphlet, produced that pamphlet. But when we move to the high-level outcomes on the right-hand side of the model, we can't have that assurance always. Sometimes we, in some outcomes models, we can have reasonable assurance at that top level, but in many outcomes models there's so many intervening steps between the output and the outcome, and there's so many other factors that influence the outcome, that merely measuring the outcome as happened does not mean that we can attribute it to a particular party. And that's typical of high-level outcomes, but not always the case for high-level outcomes. There's a little kind of nuance in there. So the technical distinction between an output and an outcome is that an output is controllable by a particular party, it's goods and services produced by a particular party, is part of an intervention, and an outcome as the final terminal boxes within the outcomes model for that intervention, for whatever we're trying to achieve in the real world. So I'll be building on that distinction later on in 3-Minute Outcomes. If you want a little bit more information about this distinction, go up to the URL here. If you'd like more information about the 3-Minute Outcomes series, then please check it out at this URL.